Senator Unger, Emil, Reverend Father, members of this congregation, friends, and fellow Canadians, Slava Isusu Christos. The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress joined the Ukrainian-Canadian Foundation of Taras Shevchenko and the Ukrainian-Canadian Civil Liberties Association to represent Ukrainian Canadians and seek redress because of the internment of Ukrainians and other East Europeans from 1914 to 1920. In 2005, the Canadian government passed Bill C-331, Internment of Persons of Ukrainian Origins Recognition Act. And then in 2008, the Canadian government created Canada's first World War Internment Recognition Fund. The Recognition Fund is administered by the Shevchenko Foundation, and its endowment council has the responsibility and the task to allocate funds across Canada to individuals and organizations that need assistance with their internment projects. These were very positive steps in recognizing the injustices by the Canadian government, and we thank them for that. Today, August the 22nd, 2014, at 11 a.m. local time, over 100 plaques will be unveiled across Canada, commemorating the 100th anniversary of Canada's first internment operation. Today also marks the 100th anniversary of the War Measures Act, which led to the internment of Ukrainians and other East Europeans. These sites were chosen and funded by the Ukrainian-Canadian Civil Liberties Foundation. Today we remember 100 years ago, how 100 years ago the Ukrainians and other Europeans who had emigrated from the Austro-Hungarian Empire were incarcerated and made to feel less Canadian, again, for crimes they did not commit. These individuals were deemed as enemy aliens, even though many were naturalized. Our prayers and remembrances will always be with the countless thousands that were interned. The facts. 100 years ago, the Canadian government began its first internment operation, starting in 1914 and ending in 1920. At the onset of World War I, the War Measures Act, August the 22nd, 1914, was implemented as a result of an order in council of the Canadian government, which resulted in the internment of 8,579 enemy aliens who were Ukrainian and Eastern European. In total, about 5,000 Ukrainians who had immigrated from the territories that had been under the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire were interned. An additional 80,000 individuals were obligated to register as enemy aliens and report to the local enforcement agencies on a very regular basis. Many of these were Ukrainian. The following Alberta centres had internment camps: Lethbridge, Banff National Park, Jasper, and Munson. The camp internees were used as forced laborers, but in doing so, they helped to develop Banff National Park. They helped in the logging industry of Northern Ontario and Quebec, and they helped in the mining industry in British Columbia, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. And I need to stress that this program was so successful that the internment program lasted 2 years more after the end of the war. The internment of Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans had a lasting, devastating effect on the internees. The internees were stripped of what they had, what they owned, and they were forced to do heavy labor. They were disenfranchised and subjected to other state sanctions, not because of what they had done, but because of who they were. The War Measures Act was used by Canadian government against the Ukrainians, was used against the Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans, was deployed against Japanese, German, and Italian Canadians during World War II. The internment of Ukrainians had yet another profound effect upon them. Right after the war and in the 20s and 30s, Ukrainians began organizing themselves. As a result, churches were built, lay organizations were formed, and the meetings began on an annual basis to discuss problems, political action was undertaken, and plans were made for the future. And internment was not far from their thoughts and minds. I don't know how many people know about this, but a delegation went to Ottawa on July the 7th, from July the 7th to the 10th, 1939. and a memorandum was presented to Prime Minister Mackenzie King and other government officials. And this was because of the dark clouds in Europe and Ukraine's strategic location. The National Ukrainian Self-Reliance Association, also called SUS, executive felt it was important to send a delegation to Ottawa to present the government with a memorandum regarding the wishes of the Ukrainian people in Canada and to confirm the position of the Ukrainians in Canada as citizens, so that when war arrived, there would be no misunderstanding with respect to Ukrainian citizenship. Now, this delegation represented all Ukrainians in Canada, included Yereniuk, Vasily Yereniuk from the SUS, Theodore Humaniuk from the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada, Reverend Father Olanchik, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Reverend Father Gigachuk Brotherhood of the Ukrainian Catholics, now called BUK. And the memorandum was presented by Yereniuk and signed by Reverend Father Dr. Kushnir from the Ukrainian Catholic Church, Reverend Father Savchuk from the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada, Peter Lazarovich, who's a member here, President of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance League of Canada, and Mr. Novichuk, President of the Brotherhood of Ukrainian Catholics. So it was time to get together, and they did that. The Canadian officials showed a deep understanding, and they were very interested in what the Ukrainian had to say about the Ukrainian matters, and were sympathetic to the views that were presented in the memorandum. The Ukrainian Self-Reliance Executive also published the following in the English press and in the Ukrainian Voice. And this was also presented in the Ukrainian Self-Reliance League of Canada bulletin, which was totally Ukrainian except for this statement, which was done in English. So there would be no understanding. In view of the outbreak of war between Great Britain and Germany, and in consequence of His Majesty the King's solemn appeal to all his loyal subjects to stand ready to make every, and if necessary, the supreme sacrifice in defense and vindication of all those principles and ideals which are vital to and which symbolize not only the British Commonwealth of Nations, but free human civilizations as a whole, we desire to make the following statement. We are not authorized and therefore do not propose to speak on behalf of all Canadian citizens of Ukrainian descent, but on behalf of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance League, we're happy to be able to assure everyone that those many thousands of Canadian citizens of Ukrainian descent who are members of or are in sympathy with the League and its affiliate organizations, that is the Union of Ukrainian Community Centers, which included the Ukrainian Orthodox Men's, Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada, Ukrainian Canadian Youth Association, the branches for the Dominion of Canada, and all those have never at any time wavered in their loyalty to the British Crown or to Canada and in the faith in democratic institutions, and that therefore all of whom, without hesitation, respond to the earnest appeal of their King and their government will faithfully serve and defend the vital interests of Canada and the British Empire side by side with other citizens by all means at their disposal in every matter which may be demanded of them. This was fear that they had. In the Edmonton Journal, in January 2nd, 1940, the Edmonton Journal reports, all Ukrainian residents in Canada are ready without reservation to do everything in their power to aid Canada in the present struggle against Germany, according to the resolution passed at the convention of more than 500 members of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance League at the M.H. Hall Institute in Edmonton, Alberta. The resolution declaring readiness to aid added, the convention was glad to know that great numbers of young Canadian Ukrainians have joined the Canadian Army and thus show their loyalty to Canada, the British Empire, and to the principles for which they stand. The Canadian Ukrainians value the principles and the noble traditions of Canada. They value its democratic system of government, and they view with abhorrence the system and practice of the totalitarian states and the conventions. And the convention condemns all attempts to spread the doctrines of fascism and communism in Canada. They were really, really uptight. And I think that they made their point. In the word of Professor Dubin Luchuk, which Father Cornell mentioned, the project CTO lead spokesman, he said the following: with Project CTO Stop. We hallow the memory of all internees and remind all Canadians of the need to remain vigilant in defense of human rights and civil liberties, particularly in time of domestic and international crisis. In conclusion,